The first ray of sunlight cut through the mist that always embraced the mountains of St. Thomas Hills at dawn. Joe Fisher had already been up for an hour, as always, even without hearing the rooster announcing the new day. His bare feet knew every stone on the ground of Tranquility Farm, every irregularity of the beaten earth that connected him to the world in a way few could understand. At 42, Joseph Benjamin Fisher, or simply Joe Fisher as everyone knew him, carried on, his face the marks of one who had lived each season in harmony with nature. His dark hair, already tinged with some white strands, framed brown eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible. The deafness, present since he was 8 years old when a high fever transformed his world into silence, was never seen by him as a limitation. It was rather a different gift, the ability to feel what others ignored. "Good morning, partner," he murmured to Lightning, the chestnut horse that approached with elegant steps. The animal responded with a gentle movement of its head as if it perfectly understood the words not heard, but felt through Joe's affectionate touch on its silky mane. The morning routine followed a sacred ritual. First, checking the animals, the dairy cows, the free-range chickens, the pigs that provided the modest but dignified sustenance for the property. Then, harvesting the vegetables that grew vigorously in the generous soil, watered by the crystalline water from the spring that bubbled at the back of the property. A natural treasure that his grandfather Jack always said was blessed by the heavens. The barn held more than tools and grains. It preserved memories of 3 generations of the Fisher family. Yellowed photographs showed Grandfather Jack alongside his father John Benjamin, all working the same land, cultivating the same dreams. On the wooden wall, a framed picture displayed the original deed to the farm, dated 1952, when his grandfather arrived at those mountains in search of peace and prosperity. While preparing the fresh cheese that would be sold at the town market, Joe Fisher felt a different vibration in the ground. Lightning, who was grazing peacefully near the porch, abruptly raised his head, ears alert, eyes fixed on the dirt road that wound its way to the entrance of the property. Something was approaching. A silver pickup truck, too shiny for these. Parts stopped in front of the wooden gate. 2 men got out, one tall in an impeccable suit despite the heat, and another shorter one carrying a leather briefcase. The first extended his hand to Joe Fisher, who had approached curiously. "Mr. Joseph Benjamin, my name is Claude Silver. I'm a businessman. This is Dr. Marcus, my lawyer." The man spoke slowly, gesturing exaggeratedly, as if that could break through the barrier of silence. "We'd like to talk about your property." Joe observed the moving lips and, with the skill developed over the years, understood most of the words. He nodded and invited them to the porch, where rustic benches offered shade and coolness. Dr. Marcus opened his briefcase and spread documents across the wooden table, colorful maps, floor plans, impressive numbers in bold. Claude pointed to the papers with controlled enthusiasm, his eyes shining with an ambition that Joe Fisher immediately recognized, even in silence. $50 million, Claude articulated slowly, showing the numbers written on paper. "It's a generous offer, to start with. You could buy any farm in America with that money and still have plenty left for a comfortable life in the city." Joe picked up one of the documents and studied the maps. He recognized the contours of his property, but also noticed other markings. Neighboring. Properties already painted red, indicating acquired in bold letters. The Sanders farm to the south, Hope Ranch to the north, even Ms. Martha's small homestead where he bought eggs on Wednesdays, all with the same red mark. "Why exactly here?" asked Joe, his voice carrying the special cadence of someone who doesn't monitor their own sound. "What's so special about my land?" Claude and Dr. Marcus exchanged a quick glance, almost imperceptible, but Joe Fisher caught the hesitation. "Regional development, Mr. Joseph, eco-tourism, jobs for locals. St. Thomas Hills needs to grow, and your property is in a strategic location." The words sounded nice, but the eyes told another story. Joe Fisher returned the documents without signing anything. "It's not for sale," he declared simply. "This land has roots that money can't buy." Claude's smile wilted slightly. "I understand, Mr. Joseph. It's natural to feel attached. But think about it. $50 million. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "I've already thought about it," replied Joe Fisher, standing up. "The answer is no." As the two men gathered their papers and headed for the car, Claude stopped halfway and turned around. "Are you sure? Sometimes circumstances change, and we can't always control those changes." The words echoed in the silence in a way that Joe Fisher felt physically. It wasn't just a question, it was a disguised warning. Lightning approached, naturally placing himself between his owner and the visitors, as if he too had sensed the change in the air. The pickup truck drove away, raising dust, but left behind something intangible and heavy. That afternoon, for the first time in years, Joe Fisher locked the gate to the farm. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. 3 days passed since Claude Silver's visit, and Tranquility Farm seemed to have lost its ancestral tranquility. Joe Fisher woke up earlier than usual, a strange restlessness disturbing his sleep. Leaving the house, he found Lightning agitated in the pasture, stamping his hooves on the dry ground with a force that made the earth vibrate. "What is it, partner?" he murmured, approaching the animal. Lightning directed his gaze toward the northern fence of the property, where something wasn't right. Joe Fisher followed the direction indicated by the horse and discovered the first sign: pieces of barbed wire cut with precision, leaving a discreet but sufficient opening for someone to pass through. It wasn't an animal's work. The marks were too clean, made with wire cutters. On the ground, boot prints different from his worn leather boots. Someone had invaded his property during the night. When checking the tractor, he found the second unpleasant surprise: the hydraulic system. Hoses were cut, leaking oil onto the ground. The damage wasn't just financial. It was the lost time, the plantation that depended on the equipment, the feeling of vulnerability he had never experienced before. "Mr. Joe Fisher," a female voice called from the entrance to the property. "May I speak with you?" A young woman of approximately 30 approached, carrying a canvas backpack and a genuine smile. Brown hair tied in a ponytail, simple but neat clothes, and a look that conveyed both curiosity and respect. "My name is Laura Rivers," she said, speaking directly to Joe Fisher and gesturing gently. "I'm a social worker and also a researcher. I heard about your traditional farming techniques at the town market. Could I visit you to learn more about your work?" Joe studied the young woman's face. There was sincerity there, different from the ambitious gleam he had seen in Claude's eyes. Laura took a notebook from her backpack and wrote, "I'm studying sustainable ways of living. Your farm is mentioned as an example of harmony with nature." "You may come in," replied Joe, unlocking the gate, "but today is not a good day. I've had some problems." Laura noticed the damaged tractor and Joe Fisher's worried expression. "Can I help?" she wrote in the notebook. "I work with rural communities. I've seen similar situations before." As they walked around the property, Joe Fisher felt compelled to share his concerns. Perhaps it was the respectful way Laura communicated, alternating between clear words and sign language gestures she had learned in college, or perhaps it was the need to confide in someone who seemed to understand. "I received a purchase offer," he told her, showing the cut points in the fence. "When I refused, this started to happen." Laura examined the damage with a professional eye. "I've seen cases like this before. Usually there's interest in something specific on the property. It's not just the value of the land." "My grandfather always said this farm was special," reflected Joe Fisher, leading Laura to the crystal-clear spring that bubbled up at the quay back of the property. "He chose this place because of the water. He said it had healing properties." Laura knelt near the spring and observed the constant and abundant flow. "Natural mineral water?" she asked, touching the clear surface. "Have you ever done any quality testing?" "Never needed to. We've always drunk from it, never got sick. The animals prefer this water too." Lightning approached, as if he had heard the conversation. The horse drank from the spring with calm movements, but kept his ears alert like a vigilant guard. "May I do some research about the region?" offered Laura. "I work with rural heritage documentation. If your farm has historical or environmental value that could help protect it. Joe Fisher agreed, grateful for the unexpected help. But while showing Laura the barn where he kept his grandfather's tools, a discovery surprised him. Behind a pile of feed bags, he found a wooden box he didn't remember seeing before. Inside it, old documents wrapped in plastic, property blueprints, soil analyses dated 1953, and a letter from Grandfather Jack addressed to him in case something happened. The letter, written in careful handwriting, revealed the first secret of Tranquility Farm. "My dear grandson," the text said, "if you're reading this, it's because someone has discovered what I always knew. Our spring is not common. The water here has special qualities, confirmed by a geologist friend. I kept these documents because I knew someday someone would come after it. Protect our land, Joseph. It's worth more than any money." Laura read the letter over Joe Fisher's shoulder, her eyes widening. "Your grandfather was right. Natural mineral water is an extremely valuable resource, and according to these maps, the spring is much more abundant than it appears on the surface." At that moment, lightning was neighing loudly outside. Joe Fisher and Laura ran to the window and saw a dark pickup truck parked on the road, with two men observing the property through binoculars. When they realized they had been noticed, the vehicle quickly drove away. "They're watching," Laura wrote in the notebook, her expression now serious. "This is no longer just a purchase offer. It's a planned operation." Joe Fisher stored the documents in a safe place, feeling the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about his home or his tranquility. It was about preserving something his grandfather had protected for decades. That night, Lightning didn't sleep in the stable. He remained in the yard in silent vigil, as if sensing that the real battle was just beginning. Laura returned the next morning with a folder full of documents and the countenance of someone who had spent the night researching. She found Joe Fisher repairing the damaged fence, with Lightning grazing nearby, always vigilant. "I discovered important things," she announced, opening the folder on the porch table. "Claude Silver isn't just a businessman interested in tourism. He represents a consortium of investors that's buying land throughout the mountain region of Virginia." Joe Fisher stopped working and approached. Laura had organized newspaper clippings, public documents, and detailed maps that showed a clear pattern. Dozens of rural properties acquired in the last 2 years, all with similar characteristics: natural, water sources, strategic location, and owners without resources to resist the pressure. "They're creating a monopoly," explained Laura, pointing to the maps. "It's not for tourism. It's for mineral water exploitation. With climate change and the scarcity of drinking water, this resource is worth a fortune." In the documents, Joe Fisher recognized familiar names: Ms. Martha, who had sold her homestead due to sudden health problems; old Anthony Sanders, who had moved to town after unexpected financial complications; the Olivers, who abandoned their property after strange accidents with their cattle. "They were all my neighbors," murmured Joe Fisher, a deep sadness taking over his voice. "People who lived here their whole lives like me." Laura gently took his hand. "But you're not alone. We can fight against this, legally." "How?" "They have money, lawyers, influence. I only have this land and—" Joe Fisher looked at Lightning, who was approaching as if he felt his owner's distress. "You have the truth," replied Laura with conviction. "And you have your grandfather's documents, proving that the spring is family historical heritage. I can initiate a process to register the property as a historical landmark." As they talked, an official car from the town hall parked at the entrance. A uniformed man got out, carrying a clipboard and a camera. He introduced himself as an environmental inspector, claiming to have received a complaint about irregular use of the spring. "I need to photograph and document the entire area near the water," explained the inspector, but his eyes avoided direct contact with Joe Fisher. "It's standard procedure." Lightning, who had been calm until then, began to show signs of agitation. The horse strategically positioned himself between the inspector and the spring, with movements that seemed calculated. When the man tried to approach the water, Lightning reared slightly and stamped his hooves on the ground, a clear warning. "Your horse is dangerous," complained the inspector, backing away. "I need to complete my inspection." "Lightning has never hurt anyone," defended Joe Fisher. He only gets like this when he senses something strange. Laura observed the scene with growing attention. Discreetly, she photographed the identification plate of the official car and noted the inspector's name. There was something suspicious about this sudden inspection right after her discovery about Claude's consortium. The inspector completed a superficial documentation and left quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the horse's vigilant presence. As soon as the car drove away, Laura checked her contacts on her cell phone. "I know people in the environmental department," she said. "I'll check if this complaint is real." 2 hours later, she returned with disturbing information. The complaint had been made by an environmental consulting company that, according to public records, provided services exclusively to Claude Silver's group. "It's a trap," concluded Laura. "They're creating legal problems to force you to sell." That afternoon, while Laura organized the documentation necessary for the landmark registration process, Joe Fisher made a disturbing discovery in the barn. Several feed bags were torn, and among the scattered grains he found a small electronic device he didn't recognize. "It's a recorder," explained Laura, examining the device. "Someone was recording your conversations." The invasion of privacy brought a new dimension to the conflict. It was no longer just pressure to sell, it was deliberate espionage. Joe Fisher felt his ancestral tranquility being systematically violated. "How many neighbors resisted before giving up?" he asked, with bitterness in his voice. "I don't know," admitted Laura, "but I know you have something they didn't have." "What?" "Lightning," she answered, observing the horse standing guard near the spring. "He senses things before they happen. It's as if he were a natural protector of this land." As if he had heard the conversation, Lightning approached and gently rested, his muzzle on Joe Fisher's shoulder. The simple gesture brought comfort, but also a responsibility that weighed more and more. That night, Joe Fisher couldn't sleep. Through the bedroom window, he watched Lightning patrolling the yard under the moonlight. The horse seemed to understand that something big was coming, something that would test all the bonds that united that land to its deepest roots. In the darkness, car lights passed slowly on the road, slower than normal. The surveillance had intensified, and Joe Fisher knew that Claude Silver's patience was running out. The week passed with growing tension that seemed to permeate the very air of the mountains. Joe Fisher woke each morning expecting to find new signs of sabotage, and Lightning had developed a patrol routine that covered every corner of the property with military precision. Laura had become a constant presence on the farm, bringing news from the outside world and working tirelessly on legal documentation. Her dedication deeply touched Joe Fisher, who couldn't remember when someone had fought so hard for him. "I got a temporary injunction," she announced one cloudy morning, waving official papers. "The landmark registration is under review, and they can't force expropriation while the process is ongoing." Joe Fisher smiled for the first time in weeks. "How can I thank you?" "By protecting this land," Laura replied simply. "It's more important than we imagined." That same day, they discovered why. While organizing Grandfather Jack's documents, they found a detailed geological map showing that the spring at Tranquility Farm was just the visible tip of a vast underground aquifer. The mineral water that bubbled there fed several smaller sources in an area of 50 square miles. "That's why they want this property so badly," Laura understood. "Whoever controls the main spring controls the entire system. It's like having the key to a national treasure." But the legal victory was brief. The following afternoon, an official letter arrived by mail summoning Joe Fisher to appear at the Pauay Town Hall for clarifications about environmental irregularities. The signature was the mayor's, but the complex legal language suggested other authors. "It's more pressure," concluded Laura. "They'll try to create legal confusion to confuse. You enforce a deal." "I'm not going to Town Hall," decided Joe Fisher. "I know it's a trap." That night, the response to his refusal came unexpectedly. Lightning woke Joe Fisher with loud and urgent neighs, something he had never done before. Through the window, Joe Fisher saw strange lights near the spring, flashlights moving in a coordinated way, as if someone were taking measurements or installing equipment. Joe Fisher quietly left through the back door, following Lightning, who moved like a shadow among the trees. They arrived in time to see two men in overalls installing suction pumps at the spring, equipment that would drain the water for analysis, or worse, to deliberately reduce the flow of the source. When Lightning became aware of the intruders' presence, he didn't hesitate. The horse advanced with determination, neighs echoing through the mountains like a war cry. The men, frightened by the sudden appearance of the imposing animal in the darkness, dropped the equipment and fled, stumbling through the woods. Joe Fisher examined the abandoned pumps. They were professional, expensive equipment, with labels from a mining company. They weren't just opportunistic thieves, it was a coordinated operation to damage his spring. The next morning, Laura arrived with a tense face and worrying news. "I spoke with contacts in the press. Claude Silver has very strong political connections. The mayor owes him favors, and there are rumors that some environmental license approvals were facilitated." "You mean we're alone?" asked Joe Fisher. "No," she replied firmly. "I contacted an environmental NGO from Fairview City. They're interested in the case and will send a documentation team. If we can prove there's corruption and environmental damage, we can take this to federal authorities." But Claude Silver wasn't willing to wait for federal processes. That afternoon he appeared personally at the farm, this time accompanied by three men who clearly weren't lawyers. "Mr. Joseph," said Claude, dispensing with previous formalities, "I need you to be reasonable. My offer now is $60 million. It's enough money to buy 10 farms better than this one." "I already said it's not for sale," replied Joe Fisher, but he noticed that Lightning had approached and strategically positioned himself between him and the visitors. "I understand the sentimental attachment," continued Claude, "but sometimes life forces us to make practical choices. Accidents happen in the countryside, equipment breaks, animals get hurt." His gaze lingered significantly on Lightning. The veiled threat was crystal clear. Joe Fisher felt a deaf rage grow in his chest, not for himself, but for the threat to his faithful companion. "If anything happens to my horse," he said with dangerous calm, "there won't be enough money in the world to make me leave this land." Claude smiled, but it was a cold smile. "I hope it won't be necessary to reach that point. You have until the end of the week to reconsider." After they left, Laura hugged Joe Fisher, feeling him trembling with contained tension. "We'll make it," she whispered. "The NGO team arrives tomorrow." But that night, Lightning didn't leave. Joe Fisher's sighed for a moment, and when Joe Fisher woke in the early morning, he found a scribbled message left on the door. "Not even the horse will protect you forever." The siege was closing in, and the final battle was approaching with the inevitability of a mountain storm. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The Free Waters NGO team arrived on a sunny morning that contrasted with the tension accumulated over the last few days. There were three people: Dr. Charles Montgomery, an experienced hydrologist, Mary Sanders, an investigative journalist, and Robert Sullivan, a lawyer specializing in environmental law. "It's a typical case of water grabbing," explained Dr. Montgomery, after examining the spring and Grandfather Jack's documents. "Businessmen identify valuable sources of mineral water, create legal problems for the owners, and then buy the lands for ridiculous prices." Mary documented everything with a professional camera, impressed with the purity of the water and the natural preservation of the property. "This story needs to be told," she said to Laura. "How many families have already lost their lands like this?" Robert analyzed the official papers with a grave expression. "The irregularities are evident. The inspector who came here isn't authorized to work in this region. The consulting company that made the complaint doesn't even officially exist. It's all forged." For the first time in weeks, Joe Fisher felt hope. But Lightning remained restless, his ears always alert, as if sensing that the danger hadn't passed. That same afternoon, the horse's intuition proved correct. An official delegation arrived at the farm. 3 cars from the town hall, 1 from the environmental police and another from the registry office. The mayor himself disembarked, accompanied by a small crowd of employees and papers. "Mr. Joseph Benjamin," declared the mayor with excessive pomp, "for non-compliance with legal summons and irregular use of water resources, this property will be sealed until definitive clarifications." Dr. Montgomery stepped forward, showing his credentials. "I'm an expert in water resources and can attest that there are no irregularities here. This spring has been exploited sustainably for generations." "I don't recognize your authority," replied the mayor coldly. "The municipal law is clear." Mary began filming the scene and Robert documented each statement. But what most drew attention was Lightning's behavior. The horse moved nervously near the official group, especially near two men who remained discreet at the back of the delegation. Laura recognized one of them. He was one of Claude Silver's companions during the last visit. The other carried a camera that seemed more focused on the property than on the official process. "They're documenting the farm for later use," Robert whispered to Joe Fisher. "They've probably already planned what they're going to build here." At that moment, Lightning did something extraordinary. The horse approached the man with the camera and, with a precise movement of his head, knocked the equipment to the ground. The camera shattered, revealing memory cards with architectural plans and feasibility studies for an industrial water bottling complex. "Your animal attacked my equipment," protested the man, involuntarily revealing that he wasn't a public official. "Who are you?" asked Mary, pointing her camera at him. "What's your role in this official operation?" The embarrassment was visible. The mayor tried to smooth over the situation, but Robert had already photographed the scattered documents from the destroyed camera. "These plans are for industrial use," declared the lawyer. "This proves that this entire operation is fraudulent. You already had plans for this property, even before the legal process." Dr. Montgomery picked up one of the plans and examined it. According to this project, they plan to extract 15,000 gallons of water per hour. That would dry up the spring in less than 2 years and affect the entire regional aquifer. The situation became unsustainable for the official delegation. The mayor, visibly nervous, ordered a withdrawal, claiming need for technical reassessment. But before leaving, one of the employees approached Joe Fisher discreetly. "Your horse saved your life today," murmured the man. "There were orders to create an incident during the inspection, something that would justify more drastic measures." Joe Fisher felt a chill down his spine. The corruption was deeper and more dangerous than he had imagined. After the delegation's departure, the NGO team organized a defense strategy. Mary would publish the report that very night. Robert would file lawsuits at the federal level, and Dr. Montgomery would prepare an irrefutable technical report on the environmental importance of the spring. "Now they'll react with everything." "They've got," warned Robert. "When the report comes out, they'll have nothing more to lose. Expect a desperate reaction." Laura stayed at the farm that night, officially to help with documentation, but in reality out of concern for Joe Fisher's safety. The two talked until late on the porch, sharing life stories and discovering a connection that transcended the current crisis. "Why are you doing this for me?" asked Joe Fisher, observing the stars that shone with special clarity in the mountains. "Because places like this need to be preserved," replied Laura, "and because people like you deserve to have their roots respected." Lightning grazed peacefully near the house, but Joe Fisher noticed that the horse always kept one ear directed toward the road. The calm was only superficial. Everyone knew that the final storm was approaching, and when it arrived, only their unity would be able to resist the fury of those who wanted to tear that land from its ancestral roots. Mary Sanders' report exploded on the internet like a trail of gunpowder. In a few hours, the title, "The Water Theft: How Businessmen Plunder Historic Springs in Virginia," was being shared thousands of times on social media. The photographs of Tranquility Farm, of Joe Fisher working in harmony with nature, and of Lightning protecting the spring deeply touched the public. Joe Fisher, who had never given much importance to technology, was impressed when Laura showed him the supportive comments coming from all over America. "There are people in New York, Los Angeles, even in Alaska talking about our farm," she said, reading the messages on her cell phone. But the repercussion also brought immediate consequences. The farm's phone, which rarely rang, wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, environmental activists, curious people, and even tourists wanted to visit the property. Joe Fisher felt overwhelmed with so much attention, but Laura helped him filter the important visits. Dr. Montgomery brought encouraging news on the second day after publication. The federal attorney's office opened an investigation, and the EPA sent a technical team to evaluate the aquifer. Claude Silver is being investigated for several environmental crimes. Robert had even better updates. I got a federal injunction preventing any alteration to the property. And more. Other owners who sold land to Claude's group are speaking out. Some want to nullify the sales. But the legal victory seemed to have awakened Claude Silver's desperation. On the third night after the report, he appeared at the farm, without warning, this time alone, and with an expression that mixed anger and panic. "You've ruined everything," he accused, pointing at Joe Fisher. 20 years of work, million-dollar investments, signed contracts, all because of a stubborn deaf man and his horse. Joe Fisher remained calm, but Lightning immediately approached, placing himself between the two men. The horse's presence seemed to irritate Claude even more. "Do you know how much money I've lost because of you? Do you know how many people depend on this project?" Claude shouted, completely losing his composure. "I offered a fortune. I was polite. I tried to resolve this in a civilized way." "The land isn't merchandise," replied Joe Fisher with serenity. "It's home, it's history, it's life." "History doesn't pay bills," exploded Claude. "You don't understand the real world, but you will understand." Laura, who was observing the scene from the porch, discreetly called Robert and left the phone open so the lawyer could hear the threats. Claude moved closer to Joe Fisher, but Lightning emitted a low and threatening neigh, making him back away. "That animal is a problem," muttered Claude, with a look that froze Joe Fisher's blood. "If you touch my horse," began Joe Fisher, but Claude interrupted him. "I won't touch anything. I don't need to. You forget that I have friends in many places. The mayor, some police officers, even people in the fire department." Claude smiled sinisterly. "Accidents happen on isolated farms. Fires are common this time of year, and in the confusion, animals get lost in the woods." The threat was so explicit that even Laura came down from the porch. "That's a crime," she declared. "Threat and coercion." "Prove it," challenged Claude. "Who's going to believe the word of a deaf man against mine?" At that moment, Robert arrived running at the farm, followed by Mary with her camera. "I recorded everything through the phone," announced the lawyer. "We have the threats registered." Claude's face paled. He looked around, realizing he was surrounded by witnesses and evidence. But instead of backing down, his expression became even more dangerous. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, in a low and threatening voice. "This region has many accidents, many indeed, and they happen mainly to those who don't collaborate." After Claude left, the team gathered to assess the situation. The threats were too clear to be ignored, and everyone agreed that Joe Fisher was in real danger. "You need to leave the farm for a few days," suggested Robert, "until the situation calms down." "I won't leave," replied Joe Fisher firmly. "If I leave now, he wins, and Lightning won't be able to adapt somewhere else." Dr. Montgomery had a different proposal. "What if we bring more people here?" The report sparked a lot of interest. "I have contacts with environmentalists, researchers, even some artists who want to support the cause." Laura supported the idea. "The more visibility, the more security. They won't try anything with witnesses around." That night, while organizing a rotating surveillance system, Joe Fisher walked to the spring with Lightning. The water continued to bubble, crystalline and abundant, indifferent to the human turbulence around it. "Thank you, partner," he said, to the horse, caressing its silky mane. "Without you, I would have already lost everything." Lightning gently rested his muzzle on Joe Fisher's shoulder, as he always did in moments of deep connection. But this time there was something different in the animal's behavior, a tension and expectation, as if he knew that the real test was yet to come. On the road, headlights passed more slowly than normal. The surveillance had intensified, and Joe Fisher knew that Claude wouldn't give up easily. The final battle was approaching, and he would need all the strength of his ancestral roots to resist the storm that was about to break over Tranquility Farm. The supporters began to arrive the next morning. First, a group of veterinary students from Virginia State University, interested in studying the relationship between Joe Fisher and lightning. Then, environmental activists from Fairview City, carrying support banners and cell phone cameras. In the afternoon, even some local artists arrived who wanted to document the farm's cultural resistance. Joe Fisher felt overwhelmed with so many people, but Laura reassured him. "It's protection," she explained. "The more witnesses, the harder it is for them to try anything." Dr. Montgomery installed monitoring equipment at the spring, documenting in real time the quality and flow of the water. Mary continued her journalistic coverage, interviewing visitors and local residents who supported Joe Fisher. But Lightning wasn't comfortable with so many strangers. The horse stayed close to the house, vigilant, rarely moving away from Joe Fisher's side. His ears moved constantly, catching sounds that others couldn't perceive. "He's nervous," observed one of the veterinary students, Anna Porter. "It's as if he's sensing some danger." As the day progressed, the tension in the air became almost palpable. Cars passed slowly on the road, some stopping to observe the movement at the farm. Around 6 in the evening, the mayor himself appeared, accompanied by state troopers. "I received complaints about irregular gathering," declared the mayor. "This property doesn't have a license for public events." Robert stepped forward, showing documents. "It's private property, and the owners have the right to receive visitors. There's no commercial event happening here." The legal impasse dragged on for 2 hours, with more officers arriving and the supporters organizing in a peaceful vigil. Joe Fisher watched everything with growing apprehension. All that confusion went against his quiet and silent nature. When the authorities finally withdrew, claiming need for license verification, the sun was already setting behind the mountains. Most of the visitors left, promising to return the next day, but a group of 8 people decided to spend the night at the farm to ensure security. Laura organized surveillance shifts, while Mary prepared a live broadcast over the internet to document any attempt at night intimidation. Dr. Montgomery and Robert reviewed legal documents, preparing for hearings that would take place the following week. Around 11 at night, Tranquility Farm was quiet but not empty. People took turns in groups of 2, walking around the perimeter of the property. Joe Fisher had retired to the house, exhausted by the day's excitement, but Lightning remained outside in his usual surveillance post. It was Lightning who first noticed that something was different. The horse began to walk in circles in the yard, stamping his hooves with increasing force. Anna Porter, who was on the surveillance shift, noticed the altered behavior. "Joe Fisher," she called. "Lightning is very agitated." Joe Fisher came out of the house and immediately felt the difference. The air was thicker, with a strange smell he couldn't identify. Lightning approached him, gently pushing him toward the spring as if wanting to show him something. That's when they saw the lights. They weren't car headlights this time, but flashlights moving in the woods, coming from several directions at once, too organized, too coordinated to be curious onlookers or tourists. "They're surrounding the property," murmured Robert, who had come running. "We need to call the police." "The police were already here today," Laura reminded him, "and they didn't seem very willing to help us." The flashlights approached slowly, as if their bearers were in no hurry. Mary began filming, broadcasting live to her followers on social media. "It's almost midnight, and we're witnessing a coordinated invasion of Tranquility Farm," she narrated in a low voice. Joe Fisher headed to the center of the yard, with Lightning at his side. The horse showed no fear, only an intense determination that seemed to emanate from every muscle of his powerful body. "We won't run away," declared Joe Fisher to the group. "This is our land, and here we'll stay." The light stopped at a distance of approximately 50 yards from the house, forming a semicircle. For a few minutes there was only tense silence. Then a voice amplified by megaphone cut through the night. "Joe Fisher, we know you're there. We just want to talk. Send the other people away and we can resolve this like civilized men." The voice was Claude Silver's, but there was something different about it, an urgency, almost desperation. "I won't send anyone away," replied Joe Fisher, his voice echoing in the quiet of the mountain. "And there's nothing for us to talk about." I've already said everything I had to say. You don't understand the situation, continued Claude's voice. I have international investors who have lost a lot of money because of you. They're not as patient as I am. If you don't accept our deal today, I can't guarantee your safety tomorrow. Laura approached Joe Fisher. It's blackmail, she whispered. He's admitting he has dangerous partners. Everything is being recorded, reminded Mary, still filming. Hundreds of people are watching live. It was then that Lightning did something extraordinary. The horse headed to the center of the yard, positioning himself exactly between the threatening lights and the house where Joe Fisher and his supporters were. He raised his head majestically, his mane trembling in the night breeze, and emitted a long and powerful neigh that echoed through the mountains like a cry of defiance. The sound was so impressive, so laden with meaning, that even the lights in the woods seemed to falter. It was as if Lightning were declaring, in the name of all the generations that had protected that land, that there would be no surrender that night. Lightning's neigh still echoed through the mountains when something unexpected happened. The lights in the woods began to move, but not toward the house. They were rapidly moving away, as if their bearers had received an urgent warning to retreat. Claude Silver appeared alone at the entrance to the yard. Without the megaphone, with empty hands raised, his posture was one of defeat, not threat. "Stop the broadcast," he asked Mary with a tired voice. "Please, I need to confess something before it's too late." Mary hesitated, but kept the camera. "Charity, the whole country is watching. If you have something to say it to everyone." Claude approached slowly, always maintaining a respectful distance from Lightning, who remained on guard. I'm not just a businessman interested in mineral water," he began, his voice breaking. "I'm Jack Fisher's grandson." The words fell, like lightning in the night silence. Joe Fisher took a step back, incredulous. "My grandfather had 2 sons," continued Claude. "John Benjamin, who stayed on the farm and became your father, and Carl Jack, who left home at 17 after a nasty fight about the property's future. Carl was my paternal grandfather." Laura took Joe Fisher's hand, feeling him tremble. The revelation was completely changing the meaning of the entire battle. "Carl became a businessman, made a fortune, but never forgot this land. He told me about the special spring, about the hidden documents, about the horse that protected the family. When he passed away, he left a letter asking me to recover our family heritage." Dr. Montgomery frowned. "Then why all this charade? Why didn't you come here explaining the truth?" Claude lowered his head, ashamed. "Because I had investors waiting for returns, signed contracts, promises made. And because Carl taught me to see the land as business, not as home. I thought it would be easier to buy than to explain." Joe Fisher approached slowly. For the first time, he could see Claude's face clearly, and recognized familiar features, especially in the brown eyes that were identical to his own. "You're my cousin," said Joe Fisher, his voice laden with emotion. "My grandfather always spoke of Carl with sadness. He said he hoped he would come home one day." "He never came back," confirmed Claude, tears beginning to flow. "But he made me promise that I would. Only I understood everything wrong. I thought doing meant owning, controlling, profiting. I didn't understand that doing meant belonging." Lightning, who had remained tense throughout the conversation, suddenly relaxed. The horse approached Claude and, surprisingly, gently rested his muzzle on his hand. It was a gesture of recognition, as if the animal could feel the blood connection. "Lightning was Carl's," said Joe Fisher, the revelation hitting him like a second bolt of lightning. "My grandfather told me that Carl had a favorite colt, a chestnut that he rode every day. When Carl left, he left the horse behind." "It can't be the same animal," murmured Dr. Montgomery. "That was more than 40 years ago." Laura, who had studied a lot about the farm, remembered something. "Joe Fisher, you said Lightning was the son of your grandfather's horse, right? Lightning's father was the horse that Carl left?" Understanding illuminated Joe Fisher's face. "Lightning is a direct descendant of Carl's horse. That's why he always protected this land with such dedication. It's in his blood, in the ancestral memories. Claude extended a trembling hand to caress Lightning, and the horse allowed it, as if recognizing something familiar in the touch. "My grandfather was right," whispered Claude. "This land has soul, and I almost destroyed it out of greed." Robert broke the emotional moment with practical questions. "And the investors, the contracts, the threats?" "I'll assume all the losses," declared Claude. "I'll sell everything I have if necessary, but I won't allow anyone to threaten our family again." Mary, still filming live, captured the moment when the two men embraced in the middle of the yard, with Lightning between them as a silent witness to the family reconciliation. The following days brought profound transformations. Claude fulfilled his promise, undoing all the businesses related to the exploitation of mineral water and compensating the investors with his own resources. The mayor and corrupt officials were investigated by the federal attorney's office, and several processes to nullify forced sales were initiated. But the biggest change was at Tranquility Farm itself. Claude, who had lost everything financially but recovered his family essence, moved into a simple house in town and began visiting the farm every day, learning from Joe Fisher the ancestral cultivation techniques that Carl had rejected decades. The property was officially registered as a historical and environmental landmark, ensuring its permanent protection. The spring became a research center for sustainable water resources, attracting scholars from across the country. Laura decided to stay in the region, developing environmental education projects that had Tranquility Farm as a model. Her partnership with Joe Fisher evolved into something deeper, a connection that grew like the plants they cultivated together in the generous soil. And Lightning, the chestnut horse, continued his ancestral vigil, but now with a peaceful heart. Sometimes in the golden afternoons of St. Thomas Hills, you could see him running free through the fields, his mane fluttering in the wind, as if celebrating the restored union between family roots and the land that nourished them. Tranquility. Farm had proven that some battles are won not with force but with love, and that the deepest roots are those that connect hearts, cross generations, and transform enemies into family.